Hi, I'm Jeremy Blowers, the Executive Director of the Ontario Regiment RCAC Museum in Oshawa, Canada. In 2019, we sent some of our members on a recce to Conneaut during D-Day, Ohio. We had hoped in 2020 that we'd be able to join you there and show off some of our Canadian and Commonwealth World War II vehicles. Since the event has been canceled due to COVID-19, we're helping out with D-Day, Ohio by sending you this video, which will highlight some of our World War II collection and some of the other vehicles here at the museum.
I'm standing in front of the M3A1 Stewart. It is the oldest tank in our collection. Of course, it runs. This vehicle was very, very popular in the armored reconnaissance, or the armored regiments, where their reconnaissance troop, or recce troop, platoon, American-sized, was equipped with these vehicles for most of the war. In late 44, early 45, a number were converted to M5 Stewarts. This is a very interesting vehicle because basically entry and exit of the vehicle can be challenging. It has a 4-person crew. You can see the driver can come in from the front. The co-driver is right next to him, and there's 2 people in the turret. What is interesting is that the driver, if he has to, can climb in and out of the front of the vehicle. The co-driver, unless he is incredibly thin and has a collapsible skull, would find that somewhat difficult. And he would have to hope that the turret is in the right location, that he could climb out and out through the hatch. Also, this vehicle is one of the only radial vehicles we have in our collection. So if the engine is not being used, the oil tends to pool in the bottom cylinders. So before you start it, you have to put in a manual crank and crank the cylinders so that basically oil gets distributed around the cylinders so you don't blow a cylinder head when you start off. Now, I would never dare try to climb in the driver's seat. However, I have a much smaller gentleman who is willing to try that and give us an indication of how simple and show you how easy it is to climb in and out of the driver's seat.
Hi, I'm Rich Bennett, the maintenance coordinator here at the Ontario Regiment Museum, and apparently the smaller individual that gets to show you how to climb in through the front hatch of our Stuart Tank. As you can see, I am much smaller than Dan.
And much older.
This tank was originally designed for the average height of around 5'8". I'm not 5'8". I'm about 6'3". Guys operating these tanks are about 150 pounds. I'm not 150 pounds, I'm about 220. So it's a little bit of a challenge for me to get into a tank, but not impossible. Normally, people would be going in through the top hatches of the tank. The top hatches of the tank are small. My shoulders barely fit through it. I have to squeeze and wiggle like this to get in through the hatch. And normally, people getting into the driver's compartment would enter through the top hatch, squeeze past the gun through an opening in the turret to get into the driver's hatch. The way that I'm going to do it is to show you the way that we normally do it, which is a little bit easier for some of us individuals to get into because we don't have to go through the confined spaces of the turret. So here we go. All right. Now there's not a lot of room in this tank because all the controls are under this glacis, and then you have the seat right behind you along with the gear shifter that'll fit under your arm. So going forward, so now that I'm inside the driver's compartment of the Stuart Tank here, I'll give you a little bit of a description of what is inside for me. It's rather tight, as you can see for me. The tiller bar controls, which are the steering and the brakes of the tank, are on either side of my knees, basically about right here. I've got a clutch pedal, an accelerator pedal, and the most awkward part of this is shifting it because it's a standard tank, because the shift lever is right underneath my armpit. So you have to let go of the controls, lift your arm, do the shift that you want, let the clutch out, and continue on with your tillers. I've got basic instrumentation on the side and in the front of the tank that'll give me the information I need to operate the tank, but this is a pretty tight spot for the driver. Right now you're looking at it with a piece of the armor plate open. If I close the other part of the armor plate, you'll be able to see a little bit more tighter. So that's what the armor installed over top of the driver. The only other thing to come down would be the sight block here, and that would provide the last piece of additional armor protection for the driver. Co-driver's got the same thing. As you can see, the co-driver would be in about the same spot, or I should say the bow plane gunner in the same spot. It's really tight, so there's very, very little room in a small tank like this, but the bonus for this being a reconnaissance tank is very quickly, so you can get away and run pretty fast if you had to. Sometimes getting out's a little harder than getting in because your feet are in an odd spot to get them around the seat. And there you have it, in and out of the Stuart tank with a large individual. As Dan was talking, for the Stuart tank, it's got a radial engine, and we need to crank it over manually to clear the oil out of the bottom cylinders before we start it. Part of our process in starting these vehicles is called a first parade, where we'll check basic fluids, make sure it's operationally ready. In this case with the Stuart, you have to have a CO2 fire extinguisher handy because they have been known to catch fire because they are gasoline engines. So in order to manually crank the engine over, we have a crank rod that's stored on the back of the tank. Fits into a little keyway on the back of the armor plate, and that'll line up with the center shaft on the engine. And then just cranking. That gives you an idea how easy it is to crank this engine. It's actually pretty easy to turn over. We normally crank it 50 times before we start. It's a must before you do this engine and an absolute requirement before you run it. Make sure that everything's okay. Once the cranking has been finished, we can take the rod out, put it back in its storage location, and then it's up to the driver to give it the gas and give it the ignition, and then we roll her over with the fire extinguisher at hand to make sure we don't catch on fire. That's cranking the engine.
What about breathing in carbon monoxide when you're closing the rear armor doors? Is that an issue?
Yeah, once the tank is started, we have to close the armored doors at the back. Now, normally those doors are held closed with bolts. In our case, we've manufactured a little device to hold the doors closed so that we can minimize our time and our exposure to carbon monoxide and noise when we're trying to close these. And because we're in these quite frequently, we don't want to make it any harder than it has to be to keep the doors closed. If it were under battle conditions, you'd have these closed, bolted tight, and the only time you'd have it open is for first parades and maintenance checks or routine maintenance. But for us here, our little steel tubing does the trick, gets us in and out fast, and stops our exposure to the exhaust that's coming right down here in your face and the noise of the engine.
Thanks for watching and your interest in the Ontario Regiment RCAC Museum. If you can't visit us here in Ontario, subscribe below so you can catch all of our videos in our different series. If you can, visit the gift shop in the link below, get some great tank swag, and support our museum. We also ask, if you are able, please consider donating. Thanks again.